for people of color. I can't process it. I have no announcements. Sensei, you want to say something? Oh, we have a, okay, we have a program and marketing circle on Monday night. Okay, I made an announcement. Our Zen Care project continues. The need for masks is as important as ever. So if you know how to sew, do we have an extra sewing machine now, Sensei?
We do have an extra sewing machine. If anybody knows how to sew and needs a sewing machine, we can loan you one if you have time.
We have about 30 people cutting and sewing masks, and we're giving them away free to people in need that need them. The people that are most vulnerable in our communities, people in Austin, nursing homes, senior citizens, homeless people, food banks, the Navajo Nation.
So if anybody knows a group that might need it, please let us know as well. And we have masks there.
Yes, we're trying to keep our ear close to the ground to see where the need is greatest. So, or if you need a mask, or anyone in your family needs a mask, we can get you one, or more than one.
Yes.
And I want to thank all the people in our network that have been cutting and sewing and making shields. And it's a small thing we can do in this difficult time.
Good morning, Roshi Sensei and everyone in the Sangha. Good morning. It's Jackie.
Jackie.
For announcements, I think it's more than appropriate to remind the Sangha that we have a circle unpacking white privilege.
Yes.
And I apologize that I haven't kept up on making sure that it gets to the newsletter, but we do have a wonderful circle, and it's very relevant. So it is the second Wednesday of the month. It is from 7 o'clock until 8:30. And you can email me or Diane. We're stewarding that circle, and it's quite provocative and necessary. So please consider joining us. We are reading from the Book of White Fragility, D'Angelo's book. We're moving quite slowly. This is a topic that we want to move through quickly. But certainly if your hearts are heavy and concerned, and please join us. It couldn't be anything but helpful. So.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, that's a really important circle. And also, Sensei, you're doing a People of Color circle with Arthi, aren't you? Do you have a plan, a next meeting time for that?
We're just going to speak again on Monday about that circle. So if anyone is interested in that, please let us know. info@zlnc.org. We've been meeting once a month, but when the COVID happened, we stopped. And it's usually like the third or fourth Monday of the month in the evenings from 7 to 8:30. And we meditate, and there's questions and answers. There was even some movement, some interplay that Arthi leads.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the nonviolent communication circle too, because all three of these circles are so deeply interconnected. And I think it's really important that we all, I know some people are attending several of the circles at the same time, and I think we all need to do everything we can. The Nonviolent Communication Circle is reading Say What You Mean. And it's a really provocative book. It echoes what's going on in the white privilege book. We meet the third Saturday of each month. Please email me if you'd like to join.
So there's a note here from Michelle saying that thank you, Lori. There's a note here from Michelle saying if anyone wants to donate to a bail fund for protesters, they can learn about that at chicagobond.org. That's chicagobond.org. Another wonderful group that we just sent a lot of mass to is Nonviolence Institute for Nonviolence in Chicago. They're in Austin. Really wonderful group of people doing work on the streets to try to work with the violence. So there's another note here from Michelle. Michelle, you want to just talk about this note here that letusbreathecollective.com? What's that about? Michelle?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of organizations. I live in the back of we live in the back of the yards neighborhood, and that is an organization that works. That's in the back of the yards neighborhood, that has created a space for like healing, and meditation and art, and it's a collective around abolishing prisons and the policing in the way that we do it. And I know there's many others in the city that do it. It's just that's our local.
Okay, thank you. So, any other announcements?
I just want to welcome any new people who have joined us for the first time, and we're really happy that you're here. Yes, welcome. And all of you who have joined us week after week. Thank you.
Does anyone know of anyone in our community or our Sangha that is sick or not well or needs to have deliveries to their home? We have people that can do deliveries. Does anyone know of someone that we can be of service to? Or okay, if you hear of someone that is sick, please feel free to email the Zen Center, and we will do what we can to be supportive in any way. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and begin my talk. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a Teisho this morning on death, grief, and gratitude in difficult times. So, When we are vulnerable, when we are afraid, when we are uncertain, we experience the pain of being human beings. We experience illness, sickness, physical, emotional pain, loss, betrayal, death, murder, rape. So we develop a set of strategies to cope with that pain. And slowly these strategies metastasize into a shell that we call ourself. And each time we perceive a new threat, a new danger, the shell gets a little thicker until we are trapped in that shell and isolated. We build our own prison. And we become frozen in that cell. And we become numb. And it's almost as if someone else is living our life for us. We're just going through the motions. In some ways, this prison is comfortable because it's familiar, but it's also claustrophobic, very stuffy. And we all long to break free. But our longing it's confusing because we have both hope and fear mixed up all together. But if we learn to listen, to be still, and to trust what is here under our feet, we can find our Buddha nature. And it's always been here. You can't own it, you can't possess it, it doesn't belong to you. If you try to possess it, it'll seemingly disappear, but it's never really gone away. And if you trust and let go, and let the universe live through you, the world live through you, then this true nature will never desert you, and it will never let you down. We are adrift. We thought we were on first class of the ship, looking down at a magnificent view, but the ship is sinking. No, the ship's not sinking. The ship is sunk. We are adrift as a country. And we're not just our individuality. We are a collective. We are families. We are communities. We are a country. We are a world. We are Homo sapiens. So our health, our well-being isn't something just about our individuality. It's about the ecosystems that support us, the communities we live in, the country we live in. And We've lost our way. We've lost our moral compass. We don't know what it means to be an American anymore. And it's really painful. It's really painful. So the ship has gone down. It's not even floating anymore. And you find yourself in the water, looking for something to hang on to, a log, piece of the ship. There are dead bodies in the water all around you. Or maybe you're on a raft. Maybe you were fortunate enough to get a raft. But now you have to decide who you're going to let into the raft, because you can only let so many people into the raft. And like many of the doctors and nurses and people working in our hospitals over time, overcrowded, you are faced with the impossible decision of deciding who's going to get a respirator and who's not. How do you make that decision? And people are having to make that decision every day. So we are adrift. So I'd like to share a koan with you from our Zen tradition. It's from the Heikigan Roku, or the Blue Cliff Record. And it's called Dao's condolence call. Dao and Chen Yuan went to a house to make a condolence call. And Chen Yuan hit the coffin and said, "Alive or dead?" Dao said, "I won't say. I won't say." Chen Yuan said, "Why won't you say?" Dao said, "I won't say." Halfway back, as they were returning, Chen Yuan said, "Tell me right away, teacher. If you don't tell me, I'm going to hit you." Chen Yuan said, Tao said, "You may hit me, but I won't say." Chen Yuan hit him. Later, Dao passed on, died. And Chen Yuan went to Xishuang and brought up the same story. And Xishuang said, "I won't say alive. I won't say dead." And Chen Yuan said, "Why won't you say?" Xin Shuang said, "I won't say. I won't say." At these words, Chen Yuan had an insight. And one day, Chen Yuan took a hoe into the teaching hall and walked back and forth from east to west and from north to south. Xi Shuang said, "What are you doing?" Qin Wang said, "I'm looking for the relics of our late master." Xi Shuang said, "Vast waves spread far and wide, foaming billows flood the skies. What relics of our late master are you looking for?" Shui Tao said, "Heavens, heavens." And Xinhuan said, "This is just where I should apply effort." At the heart of Zen, of this spiritual path we practice together, is a radical and intimate attention. And it's firsthand, it has a firsthand quality. It's not secondhand. And this firsthand quality is characterized by the beginning and the end of our lives. There is no other. There is no thought. There is no memory that interferes with this aloneness. In the living of our lives, we lose touch with this attention. We think our living instead of living our thinking. Our unborn nature is always close at hand, intimate, intimate. This moment is a birth and a death, a beginning and an end. So in Zen, in this firsthand experience, we open and let life live us. Any experience, any moment, no matter how small or insignificant, opens the doors to eternity. One of my teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche, spoke about the setting sun vision. And what he meant by that was there's a large part of our culture and our world that is afraid of death. And we become very busy in a way as a coping mechanism to distract ourselves from the fear of death. And in the process, we numb ourselves down and close our hearts. The fear of death is a fear of living. Maybe we're more afraid of freedom than we are of suffering. So we have a tradition in Zen of the Zen masters that manage to say something before they die, they write a death poem. So we have I'll give you a few here. This one's by Kozan. Empty-handed I enter the world, barefoot I leave it. My coming, my going, two simple happenings that got entangled. Here's one by Shinsui. Like dewdrops on a lotus leaf, I vanish. And one more by Nandai. Since time began, the dead alone know peace. Life is but melting snow. So when we push away death, we are pushing away life. When we treat death as the enemy, we are creating a war out of our life. So it's been said many times that it would be a good thing to make death your ally. And if you have sat with someone dying, it can enliven you. It can make you not take for granted the life that you have. And the same holds true for this virus, I think. You hear a lot of language about this horrible virus and fighting it, the war against this virus. What kind of war is this that we're fighting? Where is the enemy? We can't even see the enemy. What are the weapons we have to fight it? We don't have any weapons to fight it. So I think, at least it's just my humble opinion, that it might be a wiser course of action or to treat this virus as an ally. And from the very beginning, when this pandemic began, I gave a talk, my last talk, I read a poem by Christian Flynn's, which I think is, as I reflect, still seems to me to be the most helpful words I've seen about this virus. And we have the full text on our blog, but Christian Flynn was giving, in these words, she was trying to say, if the virus had a voice, what might it say? So I'll just read you a little short excerpt from her piece. And this is the virus speaking to us in her imagination. Despite what you might think or feel, we are not the enemy. We are messenger. We are ally. We are a balancing force. We are asking you to stop, to be still, to listen, to move beyond your individual concerns and consider the concerns of all, to be with your ignorance, to find your humility, to relinquish your thinking minds and travel deep into the mind of the heart. We will help you if you listen. our human body, our human biome is made up of, I'm told, billions, maybe trillions of viruses and billions of bacteria. Almost all of them are healthful, and we wouldn't even be alive without them. The coronavirus wants to live too. I heard a story about Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. When he was dying of cancer, he didn't do chemotherapy. I don't know if the story is true, but it's a good story anyway. He didn't do chemotherapy because he said he didn't want to kill the cancer cells in his body. What kind of perspective on one's life is that? How big a life is that? How big are our lives? Who are we? We can be imprisoned in the bag of our own skin. From everything I've been able to see, the plant, Mother Earth is happier. The air is cleaner, the waters are cleaner. There's a huge reduction in carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. Can we listen? So when we emerge from the prison of our own making, that numbness that we used to keep death away, to keep pain away, that numbness begins to melt. And what takes the place of that numbness is grief. And grief is how we learn to love again. It's how we learn to trust Mother Earth and live in accord with nature in a way that's sustainable and not upside down. So we don't sell junk toys to children. Our life is more than just consuming things. So we can learn to trust the sacred world we live in, we find ourselves in, which is such an amazing mystery and miracle. And it can carry you along. You can trust the many Buddhas in the 10 directions. Grief is important. It's how we retrieve our humanity. There's a kind of descent that's required on the spiritual path. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's required of us if we want to be fully human. We have to descend, and we do this by facing ourselves with discipline and courage facing forward and being truthful. And we don't always like the truth, but truth is truth. So the descent is part of the way we come out of the prison. And grief is part of that descent. And it seems like a bottomless well, like we'll never come out of it. So we're afraid of the grief too. We're afraid it will take us over and consume us. So it's important to give form to the grief through rituals. It's an extremely important rite of passage for spiritual communities, for any community, for any country, for our world. So when we have a leader who cannot grieve, in some ways, I think it robs us of our own capacity to grieve, and we become numb. So it's important for us to find ways to give form to the grief. If the country can't do it, then we have to do it locally. We have to return to basics. We grieve what has been lost. We grieve what we're losing. And in some strange way, we're grieving what is going to be lost in the future. There's no way to open our hearts to this broken world without grief. There's no way to look at the oil leaking out of the deep water well in the Gulf of Mexico day after day after day without grieving. There's no way to see that awful snuff video of George Floyd being murdered without grieving, without weeping. And if we can't grieve that, then we will just shut down, and our hearts will dry up, and we'll become angry and mean. And I understand the anger. So grieving is how we open to our broken hearts, our sad and tender hearts. And we grieve for the voices of people who are disenfranchised and not heard, not seen, for the people of color, Black people who die disproportionately in this pandemic. This pandemic has revealed the systemic inequities in our culture in a more stark way than ever before. But it's not only humans that are dying, it's the planet itself. We can grieve for the oil leaking in the Gulf of Mexico. We can grieve for the rainforests that are disappearing. We can grieve for the coral reefs that are bleaching and dying all over the world. This is who we are. We are the rainforest. We are the coral. We are the Gulf of Mexico being polluted by oil. And it's only by putting ourselves in a prison that we separate from that and numb down so that we don't have to feel the grief of what is being lost. So grief is not something you can control. Is often I hear when someone is grieving the death of a loved one, people will say, you know, okay, you grieved long enough, get over it. That's a really mean thing to say to people. Grieving takes as long as it takes. And no one knows how long that is. It takes as long as it takes. But grief does come to an end. And the strange and most mysterious thing about grief is that it gives birth to a kind of grace. It gives birth to a new sense of life and meaning and purpose. It gives birth to new action that wasn't possible before, that we couldn't have conceived of, that we couldn't imagine. Grief arrives, grief comes to fruition as a kind of grace, a gratitude. For the whole mystery that we are a part of. We have this sad and tender hearts, and our hearts are broken. We live in a broken world. And our practice is to sit in this broken world, in the middle of it, right in the middle of it, and to face forward, to see it. And not in the sense of just giving in to despair and saying, and I'm not, grief isn't the same as despair. Despair is how we get stuck. Grief is an active descent into something that where we retrieve our humanity, where we retrieve our capacity to love again. And we emerge from this stronger, more compassionate, more loving, kinder, with more tenderness, being less guarded. There's nothing here we need to protect. There's nothing here we need to defend. We don't need to build a fort. We don't need to build a wall. The wall's not going to keep the virus out. The wall's not going to keep sadness and grief out. The wall's not going to keep death out. So this is how we proceed in Zen practice, by We proceed by going through the fires of hell. Through storms, through plagues, riots, wars, facing forward with kindness. Being wholehearted, being willing to be touched by the pain of the world. So when we emerge from this cocoon and prison that we've made, we come out with and struggle and go through a dark night of the soul, dry periods, and we emerge from this like the butterfly from the cocoon. With a greater capacity to love, to be present, and to be free. The Pure Land has always been here. It's not somewhere else. It's right here. Namo Amida Bu. We could have a little conversation if you want, or question and answer. Any comments, thoughts?
I think you really captured the grief aspect of it beautifully, Roshi. When I see the conversations happening online, they're still very othering.
So very what?
Othering, looking at the other, who's wrong and who's right and who's the victim and who's the oppressor. And there is this incredible reluctance to have compassion for all those involved. And being able to see the suffering in the police officer and the community, and how do we address the suffering as opposed to how do we punish the action?
Yes, I think when we're afraid, and especially when we're living in the kind of environment we are with the virus right now that's invisible, the way that we project onto other is even more extreme, and it doesn't. We will find whoever is other and project onto them instead of working with our own pain and finding ways to heal the separations between ourselves and others. Because the other is me, is you. I am the police officer, and I am George Floyd. I am both. When we recite the Gate of Sweet Nectar, and we do this, we've done this service at Auschwitz many times, we always dedicate the merits to the victims and the perpetrators, because they're both suffering. Thanks, Brian. Robert?
Just picking up on what Brian said, I think it's really easy to let anger take over you when you look at, I mean, we elected a racist, right? I mean, that's part of what caused this.
Yeah.
But we have to understand, we elected him because we didn't do enough to stop it. And not by that, I don't mean activism or campaigning harder. I mean, we've built a wall in this country between largely urban people and largely rural people, and there's no dialogue between the two, none. We haven't taken our loving kindness over to that side. We haven't taught that side, and we haven't listened to that side to learn something from them and where they're coming from and what causes this. And I'm really sensitive to this because my in-laws are in rural North Dakota. Hal came from a town of 90 people. And do I agree with their political views? So now a lot of them actually have are starting to come over to our side in their case. But I know a lot of people, I know where Trump came from. I understand it. I don't agree with it, but I sure understand it. And I don't think very many people understand it, very many people on our side. And I think we have to look at George Floyd and realize we did that. And that's partly our fault. Very early in this pandemic, I turned off MSNBC. I turned off CNN. I just couldn't do it anymore. It's time to go beyond that, really. It really is. We're process, we're not things. And the process has got to be better. When you said, Roshi, right at the start of your talk, that you let the universe live through us, that's what we got to do. We got to be more verb and less noun. So that's what I kind of feel like having listened to you. And it is a moment for grief, but let's let grief transform us. That's what it's supposed to do. Boy, have I ever learned that.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert.
Good morning, Roshi.
Hi.
And everybody. Just thank you for your heart. I read this morning, and I'm paraphrasing, it was from The Mind of Clover, and it talked about how easy it is to convince myself that in this practice, and religiosity doesn't mix with politics, and just to stop right there. And that's really not what it means to be ignorant of what's going on. And I can echo what Robert said, that, very early on, I just didn't want to hear the sensationalism, and I didn't want to be confused. And I was looking for news, from the BBC and from the World Health Organization. And at some point, I just said, I'm not going to listen. And that is just the radically wrong way to go. It's just a wall. And I can convince myself that, it's politically correct and it's keeping me from politics, but it also is ripping away, the whole path that I'm destined to be on. And so I read that this morning, and then I thought, well, how do I start fresh? How do I not have these two ideas on two ends of these polar opposites? And then there was your heart. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's okay to be confused. It's okay to not know. Maybe we can't process all of it right now. So maybe important to be patient with ourselves and our neighbors and try to be kind. I think there's a common misunderstanding about Buddhism that it's only about peace and tranquility, and I think that's the furthest thing from the truth of Buddhism. I think Buddhism is very much about engaged action in the world, at least as I understand it. I don't think the Buddha was one to shirk from difficult situations. So there's a lot of outrage. I think I agree with Robert. I do listen to the news quite a bit, and that it makes me miserable most of the time. June doesn't. She's a lot happier than me. But I get tired of the outrage, and I think we need to move beyond. Outrage is a place we can get stuck, and we need to move beyond that to resistance, to resist the meanness, to resist the racist, that overt racism, to resist the injustice, to resist the systemic injustice in our society. And one way we do that is by voting. So I do think there's this, often this line between politics and spirituality, that the two can't mix. And I think we get it partly from the separation of state and church, which is probably a wise thing. But I think also there are ways to be engaged in the world, which is another way of saying being political, that don't necessarily have to look political in the way that we think of being political. There are many ways to be engaged in our communities.
I would like to say something. So a while back, I have come across this a piece of art, if you will, that was three statements of fact. The first was, whatever is not saved will be lost. And the next is, whatever is saved will be lost. And then the final is, everything will be lost. So I feel like what you talked about today, Roshi, was about that overwhelming need for us to appreciate that everything will be lost. And we have to somehow manage to be okay and to be human.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Yeah, maybe the only thing that's permanent is impermanence. So as I was, as I've been talking this morning, I think the space, I forget what they called it, the Dragon or whatever it is, went up and is now docking on the landing station, which is a little bit of good news, seems to me. That was a bright spot in my day a couple of days ago when they lifted off. It was Saturday. That was just yesterday. It was amazing. And I hope they arrive safely. And I think it reminds me of a time when we didn't succeed. I hate to be dwelling on the negative, but I was working I had an art studio in Venice Beach back in this was 1986. I was working in an art store owned by Steve Sazek, who was a student of Trungpa Rinpoche. And he had this art store called Ashe Arts, and I was working as a framer, and I was in a building across the parking lot from the art store, and I was in this room by myself making frames, and I had a little TV on, and I was watching the Challenger take off. And I remember watching it, and then 72 seconds into the liftoff, the thing disintegrated, and those 7 astronauts disappeared with it in that moment. And I broke down. I was weeping because I thought, this is not supposed to happen. This is technology. We're America. We're supposed to be exceptional, and this is not supposed to happen to us. but it did. And I do think there's a sense in which and I think something has kind of been ripped away from some illusion we've had that being an American meant that we were exceptional. And the virus couldn't come to our shores. Wars can't come to our shores. Riots aren't supposed to happen here either, although they have throughout history. So I think there's some sense in which we're having to take another take on what it means to be an American, and realize a kind of humility that, you know, we thought that we weren't the third world, but it's here. It's here. We are the third world, and we're not the leader of the world anymore. No one looks up to it. It's very painful to realize that we've kind of lost our moral compass as a country. So I think that's part of the pain we're experiencing, whether we know it consciously or not. We're carrying a lot of anxiety. We're all carrying this in our bodies. And I think it's important to be realistic, not just negative about it, but to acknowledge that we are going through a huge, huge disruptive transformation. And good things will come out of it. A lot of innovation will come out of it, like the space program. A lot of innovation came out of the world wars. A lot of innovation came out of them. And a lot of death came too. So it's not all black, it's not all white, it's not all good, it's not all bad. Sorry, but that, I think we just need to be humble and take things one day at a time. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in our culture right now. So it's important to practice loving kindness for ourselves and for others. I was in Home Depot the other day getting some plants for our Zen garden. It's the first time I'd really been out to a store. And I can tell you the atmosphere in that store was tense. It was not, I didn't really enjoy being there. Most people were wearing masks, but there was a woman there not wearing a mask, and I thought, what's the matter with her? And I realized that I was kind of on a short trigger. And I think everyone else might have been too. There's a kind of, we're kind of on edge. So the fact that people are rioting is not so hard to understand. We've been cooped up. I'm not condoning violence, but we're just a powder keg waiting to go off. And so it's imperative that we practice loving kindness and try to keep our feet on the ground and behave towards others in ways that are kind and considerate. And to me, right now, I was watching kids across the Zen Center from where we are skateboarding yesterday, not wearing masks and not social distancing. And I thought, wow, I wonder if they know what they are how risky that is. And I wanted to go over and say something to them, but I'm a 71-year-old white guy. Who's going to listen to me? I mean, they're teenagers. I wouldn't listen to me. So I thought, oh boy, this virus is not over, even though it's not over. So we are living through very, very difficult, maybe one of the most difficult times in our history. And we've got to try to take care of each other and keep our feet on the ground. So I think having a meditation practice is extremely important. And it may not be, your meditation may not be great. It may be, you may not be able to focus very well, but 5 minutes a day is better than none. 10 minutes a day is good. Whatever you can do to sit still and kind of let yourself clear out a little bit and just keep your feet on the ground, and then just put one foot in front of the other. That's kind of our Zen way. You just back to basics. Bake bread, make things again. We don't have to buy everything from China. The reason we did that is because it was cheap. Our consumer culture is based on getting cheap things from China, junk. And we're destroying the planet in the process. So again, there's a silver lining this. We could all learn to go back to something sustainable, a lifestyle that was more sustainable. Okay, that's enough of me talking. Does anyone else want to say anything before we finish? Comments?
I just want to thank everybody that contributed. Each person that spoke, it was one extra pearl of wisdom on the string, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sorry I kind of spoke so much. Maybe someone else could say something. There's something weird about Zoom. We're all talking heads in these frames. So it may be harder to interact when we're in this kind of format too.
Thank you, Roshi, for such a wonderful talk. I am sitting with a broken heart and grieving all the loss and change that we're going through. And one thing that your talk reminded me of, I think it was Mayazumi Roshi that said, we're all eventually becoming photographs on the wall. And even those don't survive. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being with us today.
Another thing Maizumi Roshi said is, we all love the flowers when they're blooming, but who can love the flower once it's died?
Or the manure we use is fertilizer. Can everyone hear me? I'm not using my headset. Have been learning over the last few months around grief, and I just want to share my experience of it. In that the grief has been really hard to hold and not just put aside. But on the other end, what I'm finding from it is a real sense of empowerment. There's something that becomes available to me, or has become available, that wasn't there before the grief. It's almost like a foothold. If you can imagine climbing a mountain, it's like, oh, now I can move in a way I couldn't move before. Another thought I had when you started in the beginning of the talk, Roshi, about the armoring we have, and I've been playing around with this, the word trance, and seeing the trance I've been in. I mean, it kind of makes it dramatic, right? But really feeling how embodied my trance is, the story I have about my life, the words I use to describe myself in the world, and am really looking at that now. What is the trance? What's the story I tell to myself? And that the way to really work on that is by engaging with the world and with others and sharing that with others. And that the engagement is almost like the world is like sandpaper, right? It's, if we stay engaged despite the discomfort to show up, it helps sand down that armoring or that trance that I find myself in. And it's only really, only through sharing with others and doing that, that it really feels like I'm making some sort of progress in terms of letting that go or seeing it, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but to engage with it. And seeing that everyone, and it's great to hear other people say, yeah, I'm in a trance too, because I think we all are in one way or another. And we really need to, a friend of mine used this term, which I really love, is we need to lock our arms and stand up together. That idea, we're sitting down, we lock arms, and then we stand up. That's how we need to be in the world right now, or maybe always, but that's how we can move forward in the best way.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Maybe we should all stand up and lock arms.
Yeah, virtually.
When we see each other again face to face for the first time, maybe we can add that to the agenda.
Maybe
We'll
so.
all get in a circle and lock arms.
Well, it's 11 o'clock, 11:02. So if the other thing I've noticed about Zoom is how we say goodbye. It's often kind of abrupt. I guess there's no way to do it without being abrupt, because you just push the button and then we're all gone. But I want to say goodbye and thank you for coming. And please take good care of yourselves. Be safe. Wear masks when you go out. Practice social distancing. Be considerate of others. And yes, I think, Robert, we're all in a trance every day. And part of our practice is just noticing that we're in a trance, and then how do we start to move out of it? That kind of numbness, I think it's a natural reaction to being overwhelmed with stuff we just can't process. So we just go into that trance to, it's a kind of protective mechanism, I think. It's almost like when an animal is, afraid, they go into it, they kind of freeze. It's that kind of thing. So I'm trying to say goodbye, but I don't really want to say goodbye. I miss you all. You're really dear to me, and I love you.
Love you too, Roshi. Until we meet again.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Roshi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roshi.
Thank you, Roshi.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Be
Bye,
well.
everyone.
Thank you.
No.
Oh, Lord.
You're still here. uh, Bye.
Hi, Sensei.